I'm impatient, but I'm also not an idiot. And I have seen who this society allows to be angry. We don't let women get angry. A woman is angry for a minute, she's a bitch. You write her off. But a guy is angry, he's strong. A black person's angry, they're ungrateful. A white person's angry, they're a leader. And there's very few examples that are so clear as motherfuckers going with guns to violently demand that they pay another person to cut their hair indoors. You're not willing to sacrifice nothing for nobody, but you are willing to kill for that? Oh, we're definitely not on the same page.
Hello, friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. On this show, I talk with people living meaningful lives, people who give a damn. Thank you so much for showing up today. I'm so incredibly glad each and every one of you are here. If you love this show, hit subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or follow us on Spotify. It would mean the world to me. Friends, you're in for a treat today. My guest is the intriguing, wise, and prolific Baratunde Thurston. You may know Baratunde from his work at The Onion, or maybe you know him from his work at The Daily Show, or maybe you've read his New York Times best-selling book, How to Be Black. And I haven't even begun to scratch the surface on all the incredible work Baratunde has done. He is also a fantastic podcast host. If you haven't checked out How to Citizen with Baratunde, you're missing out. Baratunde recently received the Social Impact Award at the 2021 iHeartRadio Podcast Awards for his work as executive producer and host of this podcast. Now, during this conversation, we talk about his amazing name, because we had to address that. We talk about growing up in Washington, D.C., his incredible career, being a black man in America, his thoughts on all the things that have happened over the past few years under the Trump presidency and in this country and around the world as a result. We talk about whether or not he feels hopeful right now, and so much more. Friends, I loved this conversation so much. I know you will as well. When we wrapped up our conversation, I felt like I could keep going for hours and hours, and that's always a good sign. Before we jump into this conversation, a quick reminder that you can, anytime and for any reason, email me at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I'd love hearing from you. And now, let's get right into my conversation with the wonderful Baratunde Thurston. Here we go. Baratunde Rafiq Thurston. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Nick. How are you?
I could not be happier to be talking with you today. I'm so excited. This has been, just a few weeks ago we scheduled this, but I've been an admirer of your work for, some time. And so I'm excited that we actually get to connect now for 60, 75 minutes or so. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Nick.
Did I say your name correctly?
Hit me one more time.
Baratunde Rafiq Thurston.
You crushed it.
So I'm Latino. My dad is Guatemalan. So when I see that name, when I first saw it years ago, when I was first introduced to your work, I wanted to say Baratunde, right? Like
Yes.
get that Latino like spice in there.
Yes.
But I'll try to remember that it's Baratunde. You actually
No. Stop. I'm gonna stop you right there. I grew up in DC in Columbia Heights, Mount Pleasant area, and there were a lot of Central American folks who increasingly were in the neighborhood, and they would say Baratunde.
There we
And
go.
like, oh, that's my joint.
Baratunde.
Actually, it is my favorite version of my name, is the Latin version. So you roll that R if you feel so called.
Fantastic. I will. I love it. You actually have I loved at the beginning of your TED Talk, which we'll get to in a little bit. You talk about the three parts of your name that really have nothing to do with. Can you just talk about, the three parts of your name that aren't really, they don't really have much to do with your background and why your parents chose those names? Because they're all, very unique. Obviously, you don't get to choose your surname, but Baratunde and Rafiq, why that name? It's very special and it's very unique. So the name, talk about it.
Yeah, so Baratunde is based on a Yoruba name from the people of Nigeria, which is Babatunde, and that means father returns. That's almost like the literal translation. Baba being father, Tunde meaning return. So if you ever know any Nigerians, it's like Olatundes and Obatundes and all kinds of Tundes.
That's right.
That's like a common suffix on a Yoruba name. And Baba is a common prefix in all kinds of societies. Papa, Baba, you have Arabic, you have Spanish, you have um, Yoruba, all kinds of languages. So my folks, especially my mother, wanted to have a little piece of Africa to impart on me. So they went shuffling through books. I was born in 77. A lot of black people were rediscovering their Africanness back then. And this book said, uh, Baratunde was just like Babatunde. You just changed one little letter. It's kind of like John with an H or without an H. It's optional. And they went with the Baratunde version, which no Nigerian ever has supported because that is not a thing. You can't just like change the word. But this book written for African Americans was like, you can totally just change it. And it said that some of the meaning also was one who was chosen. And my mother had a series of miscarriages before I showed up. And so my arrival was significant. I was definitely on like super CP time. I was a bit late by the expectations, but it was meaningful that I arrived here. So I got Baratunde as a political act and a mild mistake, according to the people whose name we were claiming.
Right.
But it doesn't really matter. It's a dope name, and I've been real proud of it. And I kind of understood the political reasons for it. It's a very strong political act for your parents to like take out all their Afrocentrism on your birth certificate. But that was the first one. And then Rafiq is a Arabic word meaning like friend or companion.
Mm.
And I don't really know why they chose that language or that culture to pick the name from. I don't know if there was another book and there was like, got the book of African names and the book of Arabic names, and we're just remixing this. There's no one else in the family. There's no direct, like the Africa thing, we're clearly black. So like at some point we were African. The Arabic thing, I don't know. Maybe there was like a flirtation with Islam. Not really sure. My mom and dad are no longer around for me to question them directly. But I do know my mother told me that the combo, Baratunde Rafiq, was meant to mean kingly companion. And I was like, oh, I kind of like that. I like that vibe. And then Thurston is the slave name. Like that's that. I know exactly why that exists. And that's some old, European name of some property owner when the property was people. And I didn't change it to X, or anything like
Sure.
that. Just kept that one. So yeah, Baratunde Rafiq Thurston. There's a lot in the name.
I ask that because names are super special to me. They weren't to my parents, and I love my parents to death. But I also understand it. I'm one of 12 kids, and so they at some point.
Wait. We got a slow. Whoa. I know you're interviewing me, but you're one of 12 kids. So there's like a child per disciple kind of situation going on. What's happening here?
I don't know what they were thinking, other than they were bored, and they really liked having sex and also not thinking about the future and how much pain and suffering was to come. But
or only thinking about the future.
Or only thinking about that.
And making a lot of bets. They're like, one of these kids going to make it.
Yeah. Hopefully, right? And we kind of defy all the odds, because no children were, to the best of my knowledge, she never miscarried any children. None of us have died. There are no real, there are some issues, but there's no real like issues, right? Like there weren't any like, oh, we can tie this shit that you're going through, or this shit that you're doing to yourself to, 12 kids in this enormous family or whatever. So it's worked out pretty well, but they didn't, there's 6 of us that share 3 middle names. So they gave the same middle name to, 3 sets of us.
That's just efficiency, man.
Right. Like they just ran out of names, but we have 3 kids, and we spent, I think the most laborious part of having these children or preparing was thinking about the names, because you carry these names. Not that John and David and whatever, it's nothing wrong with those kind of more common names, but names are so important. And you just shared that with me, and we've never met before, but I already feel much like almost closer to you, knowing sort
Yeah.
of the little history there, even the stuff you didn't know about why Rafiq, right? This Arabic
Mm-hmm.
thing, what's the tie there? But there's some mystery there. And so we gave our kids, pretty meaningful names. And I just love names. I think, and we're so bad here, like Westerners, white people are pretty bad at thinking profoundly about names, but you go outside, and I've traveled all over the world.
Yeah.
And when you go to Asia, when you go to Africa, when you go to the Caribbean, like there's just they tell you their name, and then there's story behind it. There's a real deep meaning. And I love that.
Yeah. And there's usually, there's a richer and more known culture around the name. It's either like there's a tradition of naming your child after other family members, and, tying it in to what you name your kid is almost like the lineage is coded in the name, or it's auspicious and around the position of the stars and like what was happening weather-wise at the time. So the name is a place marker in space or in time or both. And in the US, I think our tradition is to abandon traditions in some ways. Like you have refugees here, you have people fleeing, you have folks who think they're better than the places they come from. So they often don't want to remember that old world stuff. And so you're like, we're just here to make like it was called the New World. And so why would you bring all that old world stuff here? Whatever, you'll just be named after one of these biblical folk. Let's keep it moving. Or maybe just after your grandmother. Hazel begets Hazel, or
Sure.
Meredith begets Meredith, something kind of like that. And I think there's a sense, especially with white America, there's this odd tension of like a cultural jealousy where someone decided a while ago that to become white, you have to drop all this tradition stuff. You got to drop your ethnic garb and your mother tongue and your cultural, expression, and just be kind of mayonnaise. Like that's how you're a member of the club. You're not Italian anymore. You're not Greek anymore. You let all that stuff go. You're John, all right? Or you're Jane, and that's it. You're John Sixpack. And so, and then now we have all this more proud cultures, and it's like, I want some of that. Like that looks pretty cool. But the relationship, then you get cultural appropriation. It's complicated. But I think there is something interesting, because I've been around a lot of white people a lot of my life, and I can feel that like, oh, you have such a cool story and a cool name. I'm just white. And it's like, but that was also a purposeful cultural choice through history to try to flatten whiteness to make it this thing that came with like these other powers.
Yeah.
Not the cultural history, but economic dominance. So there was like a trade,
We jumped right into the deep end, and I love that right there from the get-go. I guess it's partly my fault bringing up the name stuff. That's really helpful. But before we dive too far in, Baratunde,
Yeah.
I want to know how you're doing. Like beyond the pleasantries of like, hey, bro, how are you? Like, how are you doing? It's been a hell of a year on multiple fronts, and we're not out of the pandemic yet because we live amongst millions and millions of selfish people who can't, seem to do the right thing. But we're getting there slowly but surely. How are you doing? What's been keeping you? What have been some of the good and the bad things about the pandemic? What's keeping you healthy during this time? How are you?
I am grateful. I am tired. I miss people. And I am concerned, all at once. Good things from the pandemic. I have really gotten to know a few neighbors, and we've helped each other out in some moments or just provided a respite. I remember a neighbor who was really good at composting, and I was just getting started with my compost game. And I said, hey, can I get some of your compost to help like start mine? Because I knew it would have like some of the nutrients and worms and other stuff in it. And he was like, I'll be right there. And he showed up like 10 seconds later and hung around extra long. And I was like, oh, he's not here for the compost. He's just like he needed to get out of his house.
Yes.
And he loves his family, but he is tired. And I was like just as eager. I'm like, I love my wife. I love that I'm not totally alone in this, but also I need to hear a different voice. That's just, and the fact that we didn't know each other very well, this neighbor and I, was exciting. It's like, well, what are you into? Oh, something I'm not? That's great. That's so great. Tell me more that I don't know, that I haven't already heard. So that was a good thing. And seeing people find ways to step up and help each other out. There's been so much generosity and creativity and giving, during this time. And folks, with everything that's been coming to more light for more people as far as race, like seeing white people actually finally sort of struggle with this is a thing.
Yep.
That's been really good because it's a different, there's still many who need to be convinced that it is a thing, but it's a smaller group than before. And that feels like I am grateful that there's been some benefit to all of this pain. So that's been good. And I've met cool people. I've met some new voices. I know a lot more epidemiology than I did a year ago. Like I know things like R naught, you know what I'm saying? Like rate of spread and vaccine efficacy. Like I feel like I could definitely like run a clinical trial at this point in my life.
Yeah.
And probably like rebuild society if needed. Like I definitely bought enough from Home Depot in the beginning that I could build a new world if it came to that. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And toilet paper. Like I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Way more than I did before. Those are some of the benefits of COVID. Thank you, pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just talking to, I just released a conversation actually with Craig Robinson, Michelle Obama's brother.
Yeah.
And we were talking about we spent a good chunk of time on how so many people you can't unsee the shit that we've been exposed to this year.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Both from if you just want to talk purely the disease, the pandemic, right? The ways people have responded and not responded to the calls to action and doing the right thing, to the very public and horrific lynching of George Floyd that the entire world sat in front of and then decided what they were going to do about it, right? March in the streets, support, or take a bunch of other sides. The way that the pandemic has disproportionately affected communities of color and people of color, like what's that about? You can no longer say, I didn't know that was happening, so I get a pass, I get an excuse. It's like, no, you have been exposed to so many more ways that culture, society, the government, we to each other are fucking up, and now we have to decide what we're going to do with it, right? So that's like there's more work to do than ever before in my mind, which is for those of us that give a damn, like that's a good thing and a bad thing, because now we have to decide what we're going to actually do. We can't do everything, right? That's my problem, that I have to constantly, whip myself into shape and remind myself like, yo, you cannot do it all. I know you want to do it all and you think you can do it all, but you cannot do it all. So like chill out and like figure out what you can actually manageably do. So that's like a weird thing to be grateful for, because suffering and horrific things have been exposed. But I think the gratitude is like, man, who wants to stay in darkness? Who wants to stay ignorant to the shit that's happening around the world? Like, and even not just around the world, within a stone's throw of our homes, right? Like, we got to know about that stuff.
I mean, I basically agree with that. We do have to know about that stuff. I think there is a significant contingent of people who prefer ignorance, who choose that blue pill. And like that scene in The Matrix, ignorance is bliss. Like that steak tasted really good, and he was happy to like live in the fake world because it was less painful. And I think we also see people choosing to embrace convenient propaganda, lies, myths, untruths, because there's a benefit to them in choosing that path. You can choose to believe that the 2020 election was stolen from the former president. Not because you actually believe it, but because you just like don't want to deal with the actual truth. And you feel some power in that aggrievement. And it gives you an excuse to do all kinds of undemocratic bullshit, in the name of saving the democracy that you lost a little piece of, or that you were not victorious in this exercise of democracy. So yeah, there's a significant number of people who are proudly choosing to unsee, and they want to misinterpret some of this moment and say like, oh, what's really happening is these leftists, they just hate America, and they hate white people, and they want white people to hate themselves. And who wants to feel like that? No, I'm proud. And so they swing in the other direction, because to like actually face the history is real painful, and it's real awkward. And it would force one to acknowledge that one has maybe benefited from something that was not of one's own doing.
Yeah.
And that leans toward that word privilege. And I'm not privileged. So that's very much a presence too. That backlash is rearing its head. And when I look at what this Republican Party is continuing to co-sign on to, it's not all good. We're not all waking up. Some people are taking sleeping pills in a moment of awakening.
Yeah. I mean, I live in, for one more long month, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which we were talking before you got on, like that. Nashville's not so bad in the grand scheme when you look at, what's around, but it's still like literally today, in legislative session today, they were trying to pass a bill that would allow Tennesseans to run over protesters. I mean, it's an actual fucking bill. Now it's dead, for at least for like they shot it down, at least for now. But that's
wait. They shot it down. Did they have a license to shoot?
Wait, what?
Yeah, I'm just playing with you.
Oh, that was it. Yes, no. Well, that's another bill that just passed.
I'm just saying there's a lot of violence. A lot of
you don't have to have a permit to conceal carry here. Like those are my neighbors. That's what we're dealing with. I did not get the joke, but you're so right. That is a very appropriate Tennessee joke, because that's the shit that like is happening. Meanwhile, we have a bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest still not removed from our Capitol building. So it's just yes, there are people taking sleeping pills. There are people willfully ignorant. And again, as a bystander of the work that you've been putting out and stuff, like I'm grateful for you and so many other Black voices that have led well, at least again from a social media perspective, and the different things are coming out that you've produced and made during this time. I'm so grateful for voices like yours that have been obviously strong, right? Not taking any shit, but also in a very, measured, mature way, because you certainly have all the reason in the world to be angry all the time as a Black man in America.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for that.
But I admire it so much more when that is like pulled back a little bit, reined back. And because I think here's what I've learned from a lot of Black leaders over this pandemic is that there is which again, you all don't owe this to us. You don't owe this to the rest of America, because you've been put through so much shit over the last 400 years. But there is a long game in mind. There is hey, I could get upset and angry and try to take everything by storm now, or we can demand change and we can, obviously demand progress, but there's a long game in mind, right? Which I think speaks.
Well, you're giving me / us a lot of credit, and I'm rarely one to refuse a compliment. So thank you. And it is not just wisdom and patience and positivity and thoughtfulness that leads to the decision to not be angry all the time. There is internal self-preservation as a part of that calculus. Like anger is consumptive and destructive, and it destroys the one who is angry as much, if not more, as the target of that anger in the long run. And then there's the pragmatic reality that if I showed up as angry and taking things by storm, I would be murdered very quickly. Like there are certain people in this country who can be angry. who can take buildings by storm. And they did it during the pandemic multiple times. January 6th was like the follow through on the dress rehearsals of the summer of 2020 when folks were like storming state capitals because they wanted haircuts. You know, it's still, I will never forget. You know, there is this quickly revised history that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd and the world came together and took to the streets in these great protests. But the protests that happened a few weeks before were large and armed and angry, and they were over bullshit. You know, but these, you look at the anger on these dudes' faces, mostly dudes, mostly white.
Yep.
And they're just like, my freedom, I need to go to 24-hour fitness. And I will take a gun to the state capitol for my right to like sweat indoors. Are you really? That's literally the hill you're going to kill on. Mm. And so like the January 6th thing was predicted in April 2020. When these dudes were plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan because they couldn't get fucking haircuts.
God help us.
You know, I let my wife cut my hair. That's how I dealt with that. It never occurred to me to like grab an AR-15 and go spit COVID into the face of a state trooper. I'd be dead.
Yes.
I'd be fucking dead. And so I'm impatient, but I'm also not an idiot. And I have seen who this society allows to be angry. We don't let women get angry. A woman is angry for a minute, she's a bitch. You write her off. But a guy is angry, he's strong. A black person's angry, they're ungrateful. A white person's angry, they're a leader. And there's very few examples that are so clear as motherfuckers going with guns to violently demand that they pay another person to cut their hair indoors. You're not willing to sacrifice nothing for nobody, but you are willing to kill for that? Oh, we're definitely not on the same page. So when you see black people being patient, it's because we know that we get killed when we merely demand to not be murdered in broad daylight by people sworn to protect and serve us. That we just beg to not be run down by a car for exercising the documented right of assembly. There's no documented right to a haircut. Supercuts is not even in the Constitution. I have definitely checked. So yeah, we have a double standard that is very real, to be understated about it.
So wild. So wild. So many things, so many things we could talk about from this past year. But here's what I want to do, because I want to get to the way I want to take this conversation is I want to end up, in the third act of our conversation. I want to talk about all that you're doing, which is, tremendous work. And I want to, share it with the Let's Give a Damn family. But on the way there, let's hear more, and probably more of these topics that we've already talked about will come up. But like, let's talk about your journey as Baratunde, born in Washington, D.C., correct?
That's right.
Tell me.
Original Washingtonian.
Yeah, you are.
May it become a state.
Yeah, hopefully, God, hopefully. I mean, let's talk about that for 1 second. Let's combine the Carolinas, the Dakotas. Let's get rid of, I think we could safely just like get rid of Alaska and Hawaii. It makes no sense that they're part of this country. Let's bring in Puerto Rico and DC, and let's finally just let Texas and Florida leave because they really want to. And I think we end up with like 47 states, right? We gained some, but we actually, go down in numbers. So I think that works out for everybody.
There is, I mean, I am not trying to get rid of Hawaii. I like a United States where Hawaii access does not require a passport. I've been there twice in my life. I would like to return without an excess of paperwork.
Fair enough.
So if they want to stay a part of us, I say let them stay. I'm with you though on the secessionist talkers. It's really like when sometimes I feel gracious and optimistic and positive and generous. And other times I'm petty as hell. And I'm just like, okay, so all these dudes who are just like, this is not my America, this is not the place, this is the country, then take your own advice. If you don't love this country, leave it. You've been telling Black and brown people that for a long time. There's people who are dying literally to get into this country. They want to come here and pay taxes. They're eager to. They want to come here and have babies and reproduce and grow the population so we can have a reasonable structure of a social pyramid that can fund Social Security. And you're up here whining? So go. I'm going to call your bluff, homie. Raise up out of here. How you doing? And then you do your Brexit thing. And we negotiate some new terms of engagement. And I'm pretty sure most of these fools are not ready to do that. And they'd be worse off without us. But they're not willing to say that. So they have this other claim that, well, this is just theirs, just because. It's like very immature. Well, because what? Because you're white, right? Just they won't say that. Most of them. Some of them are increasingly able to say it and willing to. But yeah, I think if you just the people who actually want to be American, let us be America. The people who are like having all these doubts and I don't know, be out. It's cool. Also, there's like no one who, like so many of these states, it's just land and cows, and buffalo and stuff. Like there's nothing, it all falls apart if you start measuring like will of the people or will of the cattle, right? Like why did there's the representation in the Senate of livestock is out of control.
Yep.
It's out of hand. And so if we really want to talk about like people representation, then that's a different kind of math. Now, again, that's not my normal frame of mind, but when I'm feeling particularly aggrieved and impatient and petty, I will invite people to take their own advice and just walk away.
I like petty. Baratunde.
Petty is fun sometimes.
Petty
it's very
fun.
human.
Petty is fun.
I acknowledge it is not my most elevated self, but it's real.
And we need some petty just to like get by, right? As long as the kind of mature, responses outweigh the pettiness. I think some pettiness is
on
okay.
net. I am not petty, but
go.
I reserve the right to have moments of pettiness.
And you deserve those. Okay, so Washington D.C. Tell me about your family, your folks. What did they do? What was sort of the upbringing? What did it feel like in your upbringing?
It felt good for the most part. I was raised by my mother and lived with her and my older sister, Belinda. She's 9 years older, lives in Michigan now. My father was not around much and then was not around at all because he was killed. And so his absence was a significant event, obviously, in my childhood. But I didn't fully understand at the time what it all meant. And my mother stepped up so much that I wasn't conscious of like a big hole in my life. I had clothes, I had food, I had friends, I had a home, I had love in the house, and I clearly turned out pretty okay. So it's been significant, and I'm starting to like think about it more, but it didn't derail, my whole development as a person. But it certainly defined my development as a person. So what family was like me, my mom, my sister, and our pets living on Newton Street in Mount Pleasant. And, neighbors kind of up in your business a little bit, but in like a loving way. And a lot of trust. We played, playing in the streets, riding our bikes, going to Rock Creek Park. DC is a great place to grow up for access to resources that don't require a ton of money. You have all the national museums there. They were free. I think they might still be. I'm not entirely sure, but I remember going to the Air and Space Museum and the National Zoo and seeing the pandas. And it was just a normal thing that we did. And we didn't have to fly or get on a long bus trip. We just go downtown. I was in the Easter egg hunt at the White House under President Reagan. I was in the inauguration of George H.W. Bush because I was a Boy Scout. And I remember we like stood sentry along the parade route. And I was like, this is cool. This is a cool place to grow up. And it got more heated over time because of crime, because of drugs, because of police. And I remember as a child feeling like, oh, my neighborhood is not as safe anymore. I can't just sit out on the stoop the way I used to. My mom wants me to come in the house. And I remember her going and joining the church across the street for peace vigils and candlelight vigils and stop the violence, mini marches and community meetings. And that was starting to occupy like a lot of time. So I remember my mother's stress. And I remember as a kid, not really appreciating it. I was like, I just want to go outside and play. And I'm getting a longer and longer list of things I can't do. And then we had to move. And that's dramatic because then you're like uprooted from everything familiar. And we moved out of DC to Tacoma Park, Maryland, which I think is just all Silver Spring now. They kind of re-designated some stuff. But it's right across the DC border. And that felt more isolating. I remember going to a private school instead of the public school because the public school was hella violent. And my mom was like, no, you're not. No, no. And so it all affected my life a lot. And where I lived, who I was educated with, like how long it took me to get to school each day. It was like an hour each way. Couple of buses and a train and a walk. But I sound like a grandparent, like I had
Right.
it took me 5 transfers and I used to burn through 6 pair of shoes uphill both ways just to get my education. But it was kind of like that. That was a long, long route to get to school. But I remember mostly enjoying, I remember when I started to meet other people and they, not that I was like living in a bubble, but when I met people not from my circumstance. And as I got older and became an adult, they listened to my childhood and they were like, how did you make it out of there?
Hmm.
Like they made it sound like I grew up in a war zone or something. And they had seen headlines about DC was the murder capital. Yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I grew up in the murder capital. But it's just where you grew up too. And there was no Instagram. There was like the Cosby Show, but there wasn't a ton of exposure to what else childhood could have been like.
Right.
And then I was pretty proud. Like I liked being from DC. I liked being Black. I liked being kind of independent. Like I knew how to take care of myself. And I would definitely meet kids who like didn't know how to wash their own clothes. And I'm like, so which one of us had the weak childhood?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of gratitude for how I was raised and for who raised me, and a strong sense of community that I grew up with and belonging that I don't feel as strongly today. I've moved a lot in my adult life, so I'm not as tethered to a specific region. I'm busy and the neighborhoods that I have lived in since used to be like the one I grew up in, but there are all these like migratory patterns of money populated by a few people, and everybody works so hard, so there's not as much time to get to know folks. Like the lack of block parties. I grew up with block parties and all this kind of community stuff, and it feels more fleeting nowadays. So I like the way I came into this world.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fascinating, and I resonate so deeply with the a few minutes ago you were talking about how people would look in and say, kind of make a spectacle of growing up in the
Yeah.
murder capital. I grew up in Guatemala, and so we grew up right at the tail end of a 30-something year civil war, and
Yeah.
so there was, I mean, insane amounts of violence. There was a kidnapping attempt on me. I saw people get murdered right in front of me. I got caught in the middle of a
Wow.
gunfight. Like all these things were happening, but it felt so normal. It was
Yeah.
our existence. It was our life. And we're in the middle of this very metropolitan hustle and bustle city in this really beautiful country, beautiful people, but very, tons and tons of violence. And they would get onto my parents, right? Again, 12 kids. They had the last 3 there. So they arrived with 8 or 9 and then had 3 more there. And they thought they were insane. Like, what the fuck are you doing taking, 9, 10, 11, 12 kids to this third world country? And for us, it was kind of great. Like, it was super fun. Like, we live in this amazing country and the people and the food and everything. So I deeply resonate with that little bit that you were talking about. Because you lost your dad, and I'm sorry for your loss. Because you lost your dad so early on, were there any other kind of mentor father figures in your life that helped you, or was it mainly, your mother, your sister, your family?
There was a whole community of dudes. My mom was very close to a friend of our family, James West, who I'm still in touch with. And he had a massive influence on me. He was a photographer, he was a bass player, a cello player, and he exposed me to all those things. And he's like a positive, fun energy. There was this guy my mom was dating for a while, this good dude, Nathan, real gentle spirit, gentle soul. Really remember appreciating him. There were these brothers. I don't remember where they were from, but there were these Latin brothers, Pepe and Pinky, and they owned a bike shop called Brothers and Bicycles. And one of them played bass too. Like I grew up playing bass. I was in the DC Youth Orchestra program, but I remember going to Pepe's place for lessons. And when I needed to get a bike, like they cut my mom a deal. We really didn't have a lot, but we all knew each other. So it was not just a transaction. It was like a community investment to like get this little dude a bike. And also my mom made me sign a contract. My mom was such a weird, intense woman, man. Like she was really concerned about me letting someone else ride my bike. And she's like, this is your bike. You will not let anybody else ride this bike. And I was like, okay, cool, whatever. And then she's like, no, seriously. So I remember, like, I don't remember the day of the week, but I remember it was like late afternoon around 4 p.m. We're at Brothers and Bicycles. We're standing at the counter. I'm about to get my first BMX bike, this relatively light, for the time bike. It's probably made of iron or something in hindsight. And it had a cool paint job where it looked cracked all over. I'm like, yeah, this bike has been through stuff, but it was just a cool paint design. But before I could take possession of the bike, my mother had handwritten a contract.
Amazing.
That I would not let anyone else ride this bike. She made me sign it. And she made Pepe sign it as a witness. And she signed it.
She was for real.
She was like, no jokes. I was like, this woman is rather intense. Definitely no other mom that I knew. They might say to their kids something like, don't let somebody else ride your bike. And then the kid's going to do what they're going to do. And my mom thought like this piece of paper was like an enforceable thing. And she involved other people too. So now our business is out in the street. It was crazy. It was really crazy.
Did you ever share it with anybody, or did you keep to that contract?
I'm pretty sure it worked. I'm pretty sure I kept to the contract.
She sufficiently scared the shit out of you, and you were like, no.
Yeah, because I'm like, what is she going to sue me? Like, what does it mean to breach? Like, I was probably 9. Like as a 9-year-old, I didn't sign a lot of documents.
Yeah. You're like, I can't be homeless over this bike.
Yeah. And I'm like, what? And I also had memories. My mom, she set a really strict and strong example. My older sister, I remember her working at B. Dalton bookstores and working at KFC. Perks, both. You get discount on books and discounts on chicken. Like, what else do you need? But I remember my mom essentially, she charged my sister rent. Like she like garnished some of her wages. She's like, I need a percentage. And my sister's like, this is my money. Like I work for this. And my mom was like, this is my house. And now that you're earning, you can contribute to us living here. And I witnessed that conversation when I was probably 8-ish years old, because my sister would have been in high school around 16 so I was like, yo, my mom is like not joking. Like she will take your money right out your piggy bank, you know what I mean? And call it like, contributing to the family. It's very gangster shit. So.
But you got to survive, right? So she's like trying.
Absolutely. And she was teaching us something.
Yeah.
She was teaching us something. She was also like relatively alone herself and like surviving all kinds of traumas. And so she showed up so intensely in a way that I didn't really understand the origins of that. I just thought like my mom is different from these other moms. And I'm not going to test her too much.
Yeah, that's for sure. So you end up at Harvard University.
I do.
And what did you study there? And then I want to figure out the pivot from Harvard. Not that it doesn't follow, but just what was the pivot from like your Harvard education to, working at The Onion and The Daily Show and all that. So what did you study at Harvard? What was your experience at Harvard like as a as a black kid from DC.
It was dope.
I'm sure.
I really loved Harvard, man. And you will not find every black alumni saying
Sure.
such things. But I had the benefit of a preview for 6 years in DC, my last 6 years as a child. I attended the Sidwell Friends School
Right.
in Washington, D.C. And I was a private school, a pretty elite private school, small population, high tuition, well-resourced. And, the Clintons sent their daughter, Chelsea, there, and other members of the administration. And obviously later, the Obamas sent both their daughters there. So it's one of these highfalutin institutions. And that was training ground. And I went through a lot of learning and adjustment and awkwardness and pain. And I came out of that pretty strong. And so Harvard wasn't the intimidating slap in the face it almost certainly would have been if I had stayed in my earlier version of DC. The Newton Street version of DC that's almost all black and brown, that's public school, that's lovely and joyful and community driven, but is not what a place like Harvard feels like. So I had this transition, and 6 years is a good amount of time to adjust. So I got to Harvard and I was like, oh, I got this pretty much. There were definitely some moments of academic struggle, but not a ton. And that's because Sidwell just whooped my butt. That's where I got my butt whooped, and I had time to catch up to that level of rigor. So I got to be myself at Harvard. I got to try things and play and explore, which means I did the newspaper, the Harvard Crimson.
Nice.
It's a daily newspaper. It's pretty close to an actual newspaper, in terms of the robustness. The alumni from that institution have gone on to run and be editors at and Pulitzer Prize winning journalists all over this country. And I was a part of that for like 3.5 years. And I was an executive editor there, and I had responsibilities and whatnot. That was dope. And then I was also a part of the Harvard Computer Society. And I'm getting access to, this is the 90s, on the internet very early and playing around with stuff. And I led the writing of a whole book about computing at Harvard. I was the editor of that. And I worked jobs because I had to pay for this thing. It's not cheap. So I worked in the computer lab, fixing people's computers, saving their printers, saving their papers and getting eaten, by printers and viruses and all that kind of stuff. And I was a part of the Black community at Harvard, the Black Men's Forum and the Black Students Association. So I just got to be a part of many worlds and stretch my wings and do theatrical productions. I took some classes too, while I was there.
Good.
Which is great. It was great. I learned stuff. I studied philosophy because a high school teacher thought I might be into it. And she was absolutely right. In fact, it was my high school English teacher, Erica Berry, who I mentioned in my TED Talk, which was this TED Talk where I diagram a bunch of sentences. And I was like, oh, my high school English teacher would be very appreciative of this moment. And then she also planted the seed of studying philosophy. So one of the first classes I took, Philosophy 3, Intro to Philosophy, Anthony Appia, and I loved it. And so I rocked with that for years. It was, there was, again, awkwardness, pain, failure.
Sure.
Like I had no romantic relationships. Finances were not great. It's cold, not just temperature-wise, but like personality-wise in New England. That's not great. And a place like Harvard, with being Black there, it's being Black in America. There's a history of exclusion and what paintings are on the wall, and somebody's going to put a swastika on the wall or write the N-word on the wall. So it's kind of like the same story. But by the time I got there, it wasn't a shocking story. And so I don't think it knocked me off my game as much as it might have if I hadn't been raised in the house I was raised in, to already be primed to see that this stuff was part of America, to be primed to already love myself with my pseudo-Nigerian name, and this political mom, and to have that Sidwell time to adapt, to these different to that type of institution.
I have a love-hate relationship with university, mostly because it mostly just feels like overpriced, like shit show, where, most of my friends are not using anything. They're not in the career that they went to school for. And they're still, they're in their late 30s. and still deeply in debt from school, right? And so I
Yeah.
hate that part about college and how we've made it this like God, like you have to go. I mean, it's loosening up now where places like Google and Apple don't require a degree, as long as you can do the shit, like we don't need you to have a degree. But for decades and longer, it's been you have to have a degree. We need you to have a master's degree to make $17 an hour for X job. And that's just like ridiculous. But I'm also, so I hate it on the one hand, but I'm equally fascinated at your experience and the experience that many people have told me where it's so life shaping and the things you get to do in that environment. It's your first, maybe I didn't need it as much because my parents, like growing up in a foreign country, they let me start going off on trips by myself with like complete strangers to other countries when I was a teenager. They were very like, go off and like find your way. So I had already had experiences. It wasn't like I was going from this very protective environment to, school. But I quit school. I went to Bible college, and I quit school 2 years in, or a year and a half in. I was doing well academically, but I was like, I feel I'm paying you lots of money to not teach me anything that I couldn't learn. Like I was already like
Yeah.
a voracious like reader, and I love to study and I love to research. And so I was like, I'm not going to keep paying you, and I could just buy the books and go home and do it myself, right? But I
Yeah.
sometimes, every once in a while, I miss school, and I'm like, man, I wish I could, like, maybe someday I will go back for something. I don't know that I need it at this point, but maybe I do. So I'm glad your experience was, positive, it seems, for the most part.
It was positive for the most part. I mean, I think I was lucky to go to college before social media.
Sure.
I just I was very fortunate that I was born in 1977. I didn't choose it. Maybe my soul chose it, but I came up in that era, and I don't know how I would have handled those additional pressures and that additional screen in my life. I was already really addicted to the internet when it was slow and had no pictures. So I don't know what I would do with HD, internet and true broadband. And I think, what's happened in the past 20 plus years is the experience I had has become even more expensive,
Yeah.
more debt laden or less accessible in general. And I think, what I did shouldn't be for everybody. Like it shouldn't be a requirement to do all that. And I was lucky that I got myself out of the debt hole. I worked a lot during college. I had a lot of financial aid, and I left with still a lot of debt. And I hustled to pay that off. And I didn't have, I was lucky that I didn't want to go to grad school, which would, like if I'd gone to law school or gone to medical school, I have
200,000
friends
more.
who
Yeah.
did that. And you're boxed into these career choices by that debt hole, so then you got to go work for some institution that doesn't excite you, doesn't bring out the best in you, but brings out the money so that you can kind of be free. So it's like debtor's prison for your dreams for some people. And for some, they don't even recognize that it is, which is a little sadder still. So yeah, I think there's a college has become this very privileged experience, and some of what it can offer should be more broadly available. The ability to like explore yourself and engage in activities and have a level of security around experimentation, to have a level of resource and access to that resource. Like it shouldn't cost that much to learn. It shouldn't cost that much to collaborate with other people around things you might enjoy, right? Like a newspaper. We should have a society that lets kids make media together, and not have to work 4 jobs just to help out, paying their family's rent. And so there's a larger economic failure and a larger creative failure of our society when that kind of experience is reserved for people who have the most resources or people willing to sacrifice so much for a shot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like most things in life, university is nuanced, right? Your career is very fascinating to me because you're much more famous than I am, but it's been sort of I think there's parallels in that it seems like over the last period you've done a variety of different things that have looked, very different from each other. And each opportunity sort of built on the next one to give you more and more opportunities. And I love that. You've worked for The Onion, you produced on The Daily Show, you have written for, some of the biggest, publications out there. Your book from 2012, I think it was, How to Be Black, just a fascinating, funny memoir. Talk to me about how you see your career. And obviously you're still, super young and vibrant, and you have a long, career ahead of you, I hope. So like, how have you seen it sort of evolve, and kind of what's next? And we'll talk about, some of the things that you're currently doing, your podcast and stuff like that. But how have you seen your career, your fascinating career, sort of evolve to where it is now?
In the beginning, I was just trying to pay for college.
Sure.
Like I have worked the majority of my life. And when I was in middle school, or was it high school? Probably safer to say high school. But I started working. I had little entrepreneurial ventures. I did work for my mom's friends. I did the lawn mowing thing, or the clearing people's backyards and stuff like that, ad hoc. But my first consistent job was as a high school student. I worked at the Washington Post as in a job that's known as the copy aide, where you're like this internal gopher. And I answered phones and delivered internal memos and ran off copies of things and sorted mail and delivered mail in a little basket inside the building. And I got to interact with like award-winning reporters 3 seconds at a time. You know? And that felt really cool. I'm being from DC and knowing the history of that institution. And I'm just a high school kid. But I was like, it was such a job. Like I was in the union. Like I got a real pay stub. It wasn't like a high school program. I was just a kid working, at night after Sidwell. So I've worked a long time, and I've first job kind of in media in terms of any kind of benefits associated with it. Worked through college with computers and worked after college to pay for that college experience, working in consulting around technology and business and telecom, innovation, broadly speaking. So the evolution from college to like get into work somewhere as small and cool as The Onion or The Daily Show is necessity, started some of those first steps. Other people believing in me pushed me. I think, if I was married before, so my first wife was a musician. We went to Harvard together. She was a few years younger. And as I was starting to get sucked into the corporate job that I took to pay for the cool college experience I spent a lot of time telling you about, she was lovingly insistent that I might not be doing what I'm meant to do. And she had credibility because she was doing what she felt she was meant to do. She was playing music. And she was playing in the streets for people throwing pennies in her guitar case. And she was like, what are you doing? In many more words with a lot more compassion to that. But basically it was like, dude, what are you doing with your life? And I was like, dude, I'm paying for college. Yeah, okay, but what besides that? And that was that lit a fire and reminded me I have a lot of creativity that I need to get out. And so I restarted a creative life that I'd also been exploring in college and even in high school to some degree, which is writing for fun, for me, not just for the student newspaper, but like writing jokes, writing satirical news coverage, writing things that had to do with politics. And I started writing again. This is 2001, 2002. And you also had 9/11, which is like this obviously massive and shocking event. And things like that make a lot of people question, what am I doing with my time on this planet, with this life? It's not assured. So make the most of it. And so I started studying creative arts again. I took a stand-up comedy class. I took a comedy writing class. And I took all the hustle that I had inside of me. The hustle that got me through DC, the hustle that got me through Sidwell, that got me through Harvard, that got me through the murder capital without feeling like I was at risk of being murdered constantly. And I poured it in to this new outlet that was really an old outlet, this creative outlet. And I gave a lot to my day job, but I reserved some for me. And I slept very little for years as I lived these two lives. And that helped me push through and find a way to like do creative stuff and make some money, get some healthcare and not just have it be this random thing that was kind of undirected. And when I get focused on something, like when I want something, Nick, I will pursue it. Like I wanted to figure out composting. I bought a book on composting. I started looking at YouTube videos on composting. I talked to my neighbor about I am like very good at composting now. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna say I'm the king of composting, but I'm pretty good. And kids in the neighborhood know. They keep some scraps for Baratunde. And so like, could I apply that to creativity, to writing, and to channeling my political messages, which have always been there because my mother was my mother and she helped plant/unlock some of that in me. How could I find a voice for that also helped me live? And so The Onion was like, nothing is a foregone conclusion, but it made sense that it happened the way it did because I had just been in the gym. I had been busting my ass at garbage open mics for years, writing these satirical news emails that handfuls of people were sort of reading for years, self-publishing multiple books, for years, and then commuting to New York to try to get on stage, to try to learn from a workshop. So I was ready, almost like being, that I felt kind of ready for Harvard because of those 6 years at Sidwell when the Onion opportunity presented itself, which was in 2007. 6 years after I got this kick in the butt from my girlfriend at the time, 6 years after the 9/11 moment, I didn't wake up and say, "Ooh, there's a job at the Onion. How could I get that?" A friend was like, "There's a job at the Onion that's meant for you. You need to get that," because they knew too, because I also hadn't been quiet about what I was up to. And so, yeah, a lot of people believing in me when I was not quite ready to be believed in, certainly didn't have external proof, but they saw something. I'm grateful to Mika, that was my first wife. I'm grateful to Justin Krebs, who, as we're recording, is running for like City Council of New York. He roped me in, and he was the one that told me about the Onion job. All kinds of folks. It's definitely not just, I work hard for sure, but that's rarely enough.
No, totally. So that's what I'm glad you took it the direction you did, because obviously it's obvious you worked your ass off for decades to get to the place where you are. But there's always some other elements like people pushing us. We need a community to push us, right? The people that listen to this podcast, they want to make a difference in the world. They want to start things. They kind of want to fuck shit up, right? In society and culture. And they want to make changes.
Yeah, because they give
a damn, but it doesn't happen in this kind of dreamy, fantasy kind of way where it's like, oh, I have a great idea and this is going to work. No, like it takes a long fucking time to make these things work. And it takes people pushing us. It takes people saying, hey, there's this job that you should take. You don't know that you've been working toward this, but you've been working toward this. And it takes, loved ones and mentors and people around us saying, okay, these first 3 books or whatever, not many people read them, but this is the book that needs to come out, and not, and then boom, a New York Times bestseller. And it's an incremental, I see this incremental building. But I'm sure what I want to also point out is there were probably lots of times along the way where you may have said, well, this isn't going to work, or maybe I should just give up and go back to that corporate thing. I don't know. A lot of people do, where it's like, well, it hasn't hit yet, so maybe it's not going to hit ever. And I'm always encouraging people, like, don't fucking give up. Like, if this is something, if you feel this fire in your bones, if this is something that you think God or whatever higher power you believe in put you on earth to do, like, keep pushing. Because A, the universe doesn't owe you anything, but it will require you continuing to push, continuing to move forward, because you don't know, like, if it's hurdle number 20 that's going to be your kind of jumping off point, or hurdle 45. Or hurdle 120. You just don't know those things. We're not privy to that information. So we got to keep pushing. We got to keep hustling, right?
I definitely have, I've lived with an unreasonable set of beliefs in myself. Like a reasonable set of behaviors would have had me change course at many other points and just, dude, it's not working. Stop. Just get the job, just get the healthcare, just get something more secure and more stable. And the reasons that I didn't do that are self-delusion. It's very powerful. It's very useful. Sometimes pays off. You believe something about yourself until it's true, before it's true. And sometimes it never comes true. Like, it's not a guarantee. There are no guarantees. Death is guaranteed for now, right? But otherwise, everything else is up for grabs. So I definitely, I believed in myself. I think I was very fortunate to feel relatively free in a world that doesn't encourage me to feel that way. And I grew up loved. I grew up housed and clothed. I grew up encouraged to explore what I was into. I didn't grow up in a household where my mother's like, you're going to do this. And if you don't do this, you're not my child. There's people who live that story. And so if presented with an opportunity to step out on their own and define themselves, it could be terrifying because no one ever told them that they could do that. I was told from a very early age, you can be anything. You can do anything. I think I believed my mom, for better ultimately, but sometimes for worse. So that helped. I got lucky. There's like an alternate version of my life where I end up in jail. There's an alternate version of my life where I'm struck by a stray bullet and don't make it. There's an alternate version of my life where I missed the email. I missed the email and I don't get that job at the Onion, which unlocked so many other levels. Like, if I look at my life as a video game, like, that was a key level up. And I could see so much more of the map when I got through that door. But without it, I'm not saying I wouldn't be Baratunde. I would always be Baratunde. But I might be a very different version. Maybe end up working at an advertising agency. Right? That's very plausible, very still storytelling, still digital, uses a lot of the things, but I might not, my efforts and my labor may have been loaned out for much longer to somebody else's name rather than doing it in my own name and risking my own reputation in the process. So all that is part of it. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for hours. I probably shouldn't, but it is not as simple as just pursue your passion, man.
Right.
Like, just follow your dreams. I was lucky, I was so lucky, and it was timed well, and I worked hard, right? It's all those things. And I had people put even that the How to Be Black book, like my friend Maui, refugee from Eritrea, Ethiopia, met him at Harvard. This dude had credibility. He wrote a book. He wrote a memoir when he was like 18 years old. Like, or 21 years old. You're 21, you write a memoir. You think you're Frederick Douglass? What are you doing here? But then when he saw my scribblings, my little email newsletter, my newsflash newsletter, my self-published, printed at Kinko's, stapled at home books in very heavy quotation marks, I remember him saying, he's like, you know what you do? You mock the world. And the world needs mocking. You need to write a book. You really need to write a book. And I wasn't going to do it. Maui was like, you need to write a book. And then HarperCollins comes along some years later, like, you need to write a book. I'm like, well, Maui said it, now Harper says it. That's 2 data points. I'm going to say that's a pattern. And I'm going to go forth with this. I became friends with Anand Giridharadas years back, a writer, speaker,
He's amazing.
agitator, rabble-rouser.
Yes.
And I remember, my life is nuts, Nick. I met Anand and his now wife, Priya, in Paris on a beautiful Parisian evening at some event. We're on the balcony looking at the Eiffel Tower, drinking champagne. That was how we met. It was crazy, wild, beautiful, and auspicious. But where we got to know each other, walking around Paris, talking on that trip, realizing we both went to the same high school. And then on a subsequent trip to the Republic of Georgia, in Central Eastern Europe, and him breaking down the business model of public speaking. And he's like, you could really crush it as a speaker. You're very good at this. Here's how it works for me. And I was like, oh, that, again, unlocking levels, which helped make my whole life sustainable financially. Because just dreams, they do not pay for stuff, not on their own. So I've had these mentors and peers and angels, and then there's probably people I don't even know who've put in a word, endorsed me, made an introduction or recommendation. So I thank all those folks.
Yeah,
too.
amazing. I mean, life is a community effort, right? I love all of those kind of pieces that you just put together for us. I know we're coming up on our time, and I want to be respectful today. Hopefully, maybe someday we can do a round 2 because I have so much more to talk with you about. But I would let's spend the last bit of our time on your podcast. I want to send every Let's Give a Damn listener over to How to Citizen with Baratunde podcast. Tell me, I mean, I've listened to a few episodes. You're great at it. You're a great question asker. You're a great listener. Talk to me about How to Citizen. How did it come about? When people head over there, as I hope they will, and I'll do my best to push them over there. What's it about? What can they expect, and how can they get involved in that effort? Because it's fantastic, and it was named one of Apple's favorite podcasts 2020. No big deal. Mine hasn't been named anything like that, so you've got a leg up there on me. But talk about the podcast.
This is I'm very proud of this podcast. There are certain things that I've helped create where I'm just like, you did it. You did the damn thing. How to Be Black is one of those projects where I feel like I put it all out there. It's on the page. I gave more of myself than I expected. And it's still connecting, still resonating. The TED Talk in 2019 I did, Deconstructing Racism, one headline at a time. Similar vibe. I'm like, oh, that was a high watermark. Most of my tweets, not so much. Not so much at all. But those 2 pieces of work, I would be proud at the end of my life and know that those are some of the best things that I helped give birth to. How to Citizen is up there and is the current thing at the top of the list of my priorities creatively and socially. I knew I had something in me to channel all this stuff that I have felt compelled to participate in. I have felt compelled to join marches and sign petitions. I have felt compelled to believe in this damn country, even when it doesn't believe in me. I have felt compelled to fight for racial justice. I felt compelled to use my voice and my comedy to talk about these things in ways that might invite a few more people to the table, in ways that shame and facts don't. They just don't. It can be very righteous and very correct and not change a single mind.
Right.
And so between being effective and being right, there's sometimes a choice. There's certainly a balance. And I'd been struggling to give birth to the show in many forms for many, many years. I mean, I made TV pilots. I pitched things. I wrote treatments. I did other podcasting efforts. And it finally emerged in the summer of 2020, How to Citizen with Baratunde as a podcast. A lot of credit goes to my wife, Elizabeth. She was like the partner I needed at the time I needed to help get this thing out the door. And we have built this show where citizen is a verb. That's like the simplest sales pitch. And if you just sit with that and say that to yourself, citizen as a verb. First of all, this dude, we went to Harvard, thinks he can just change grammar. Like citizen is definitely a noun. But we're people and we can change things. We can. We can change laws, we can change rules, we can change the meanings of words. So let's recreate this word, citizen, to imply a level of action. What do we do? Who's doing things? And I am impatient with merely understanding that the world can be an unjust and unforgiving place, an unfair and unwelcoming place. I know that. I live that. My family's lived that. I could run off a list of infinite stories. Also, we can do stuff, And I think especially during the last presidency, that's where the word doom scrolling emerged. Every bit of news was an assault on our belief in ourselves. And it became addictive to lose faith. Well, obviously, Stephen Miller wants to sacrifice babies at the border. That's just what he does, the Santa Monica fascist. Obviously, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, Bill Barr. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. In the Supreme Court, of course, Trump's going to get 3 people in a... And there's something really destructive and addictive and self-reinforcing about believing that things will get worse and that we just have to sit and witness it. And the best we could do is document our doom. That is not me. It lights me up. It's indulgent. It's self-indulgent. It is disrespectful to the people that brought us here. Across borders, across time, across firing lines. I would not be here if a bunch of people hadn't put themselves in front of a knife or a gun or some form of abuse for me to be there. And if they had had that attitude, that all I can do is just witness the destruction and the damned, none of us would be here. So it pisses me off and it inspires me because I knew there was like another type of story that we could tell. And because of the weird journey my life has taken with comedians and writers and activists and technologists, my Rolodex is dope. Right? I just like personally knew too many people doing more than bearing witness to our destruction, but engage in an act of reconstruction of something better. Citizening, turning this thing into a verb, showing up, participating, building with other people, knowing their power in deep ways that went well beyond the voting thing. Voting's so important, but so not enough. Necessary, but insufficient. One of the first things I ever learned in philosophy is necessary, but not sufficient. I felt real smart as an 18-year-old learning to use words in that way. But now I feel it. Yeah, voting is necessary and totally insufficient, especially if votes are not counted because you have an electoral college, which gives cows more votes than people. That's what that's the spirit of the show. I probably couldn't be any clearer about what has inspired it and where we're going for, what we're going for. And we're in the second season now. First season was a scattershot approach. Just grab people from the email contact list, throw them in a chair on Zoom. Let's talk about what you're doing. And always giving the audience something they could do to citizen. The second season, like we are making a case for something in the second season. And it's all about money and economics and how the system that we live in economically makes it very hard to do all these things I believe we have to do to self-govern. That's the whole, otherwise we could just outsource, just give all our power to a dictator, let them tell us what to do. Many people have chosen that path throughout history and today. And it's always available. Always. But if we're going to govern ourselves, then we need to practice that. We need to know what that means. And we need to have an economic system that makes it possible. Otherwise, all my mouthing off, we can citizen, we can show up, we can know our power. That's just a pipe dream when you can't pay your rent. It's just like, we don't even have time. So how do we do that? And I'm just like, we are bringing it in season 2. With some historical analysis, with some highlighting people doing stuff today. And I hope we do season 3. We have more themes to go in harder on it. That's the show. That's what we're up to. howtocitizen.com. People can point their browsers there, find us on social, and just give it a whirl. Give it a listen. But I would strongly encourage people, if you have a lot of time, roll back to the beginning of season 1, play it in order, and feel the evolution. You kind of relive some of the election stuff too. But if you had limited time like most people, I get it. Just start with season 2. But listen in order because we're building something. And I'd love for your listeners to help us all build it. This is not a show that's just about how smart Baratunde is or how smart his guests are. It is about what we can and must do to preserve our freedom.
I fucking love it, man. So good.
Thanks for letting me go on such a rant. I didn't know I had
No. I love all of it. I want everybody to go check it out. How to Citizen with Baratunde podcast, How to Be Black. an amazing book, an amazing memoir, your TED Talk from June of 2019, How to Destruct Racism, One Headline at a Time. Brian Williams called it, one of the best TED Talks ever, and that's high praise. You've just done so much. I want people to check it out. All the things will be in the show notes. But Baratunde Thurston, thank you so much for joining us today. This was just fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. This is a really good part of my day. I appreciate your time and what you're doing with your platform and with your voice. And thanks for sharing so much of your own story. It made it more of a conversation and less of like an interrogation. Some of these, shows can be like somebody just shows up with 1,000 questions and just like extracting, bits. It's like story mining. And I appreciate you engaging as well. I feel like I've learned a lot too.
100%. Thank you, brother.
All right.
Well, my friends, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining Baratunde and me. To learn more about Baratunde Thurston and all things Let's Give a Damn, visit baratunde.com and letsgiveadamn.com. If you're still listening, you're a real one, and I love you to pieces. Thank you for showing up today. I'm so grateful for you. Chad Snavely, Jess Collins, and the team at Sound On Studios made this episode. The music is by our friend Propaganda. You can reach out to me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I love you all. Be safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.